Hello and welcome to the Everything's Black and White podcast with me, Aaron Stokes. I'm joined this afternoon by the Daily Mirror's Simon Bird. Anybody watching this live or listening later expecting to hear Andrew Musgrove, I'm sorry to say that he's off for the next 2 weeks as he goes to get married. Very, very selfish of him. So I'll be taking over the hosting duties for the next 2 weeks. We've got absolutely plenty to talk about. If you're listening or watching live on Facebook, Twitter or YouTube, please do give us a like and a follow and drop those comments in the comment section. We'll get through as many of them as we can. So Simon, look, Newcastle United, it feels so weird, doesn't it, that all of a sudden they're just a very, very good team. It looked like it was going to be hard work in the first half the other day, but they came through it with a very good second 45 minutes. What did you make of it? How good are Newcastle United these days?
Well, it's quite amazing considering where we were this time last year. 12 months ago, Steve Bruce was still in charge. There was a new owner, obviously, with a lot of optimism. But they had one win. I think they hadn't won at this time. They got a first win in December, and the second win January the 22nd, I think, against Leeds. So I think I calculated the other day that they've got 24 points at the minute this season. It's not even November. Last year, it took them till February the 19th to get that same points total. So the turnaround has been absolutely amazing. And on the big picture stuff, it's fantastic to cover the club at the minute because we've had so many kind of lean years and miserable years when, you're criticising people and criticising owners and the fans are fed up and they're, not really bothering to read your stuff. And it's really it was a real struggle apart from that Pardew year when they finished fifth. And it's been, it's been so enjoyable this year just to get, first of all, the positivity injected. And that's come mainly from the crowd. And you have to say that the crowd has played a huge part in what's going on at St James's Park. And then the players responding just magnificently to what Eddie Howe's tried to do. Go on. Yeah.
You've touched on it there. I mean, the home games now, people are excited to go. There's that buzz back about the city that everyone talks about from years gone by. And obviously Newcastle haven't tasted defeat at home at St James's Park. How do you feel that the home games have sort of impacted their start of the season?
Well, it's like massive cliche, but it's become a fortress, and that's what if you're not going to lose at home, and you go to home games now thinking even if it's Man City, they're not going to lose this, and they will probably win. I think in 2022, since that cup game that they lost against Cambridge at St James's Park, I think they've only lost once to Liverpool in April last year, and they're undefeated this year. I think that's 16 games with just one defeat at home. So the stats are proving that it's a really difficult place to come now. And I think most managers now that we question after the games are basically saying, well, we look at the crowd and we see the atmosphere here, and it's a big club and they're going places. And there's kind of a thing in the opposition's head already that Newcastle are going places and this is going to be tough. And a lot of them try to raise their game like Villa did on the first half on Saturday. But ultimately, Newcastle are so relentless and the crowd are so on side. And it is like, it's another cliche, it is like a 12th man. And I think in past years, it's been a chore going to watch Newcastle and there hasn't been that atmosphere. And since War Flags made like the build-up an occasion and the music is blasting out, and I think that it's got to lift you as an athlete and as a player to walk out to that. Not just lift you in terms of excitement, which I think it does, but in terms of, wow, we're going to have to live up to this lot's expectation, what they actually want from us. So I think it's two fronts. And there was an interesting. You always look at the players in the eye when they run out and they're in the lineup before the game. I think not this home game, but the one before that. Again, the crowd was was noisy. It was atmospheric. The flags were going, and Miggy Almiron kind of just dug Sean Longstaff in his ribs and went this, and you couldn't see what he said, but it was something. This is great. Look at this, and you could see the players were feeding off it, which is really great to see. And I think any team now coming to St James's thinks this is going to be really tough, and they're not beaten before the start because they'll have a tactical plan and all that. But when you get into the depths of a game in the 50th minute and Newcastle are still running at you, still pressing you hard, it just becomes too much, and that's what Villa succumbed to at the weekend.
Yeah, I think, War Flags, the job they've done, they have turned it into an occasion, pre-game. And I think, especially when the players get the individual flags and you can see them looking up, we know how much it means to them. And I think I always go back to that Arsenal game last May when War Flags, that was probably their best ever display. Obviously, from the first minute, Newcastle just sort of fed off that. And I think there was one game this season, obviously I think it was Palace or Bournemouth, whichever one was just after the Queen's death, and for obvious reasons there wasn't any flags, but it was a huge miss because actually the game started quite flat, and Newcastle players sort of weren't at the same tempo that they usually are when they have these displays. Let's talk about the game then. So first half on Saturday, the rain was obviously pouring, pretty heavily before the game. Neither side could really get a grip in the early stages, and it sort of reminded me a bit of those games where earlier in the season we've seen at home when Newcastle was struggling in front of goal and, just struggling to find that sort of killer pass in the last sort of final third of the pitch. What did you make of the start on Saturday?
I thought it was really even, and it was like you were sitting there thinking, this is a nice test. I mean, Villa clearly had they won the last game 4-0 despite some pretty poor form that got Gerrard sacked. And they were good down the flanks with Bailey and Buendia was very slippery, and Ings was buzzing around, and I think they got in a couple of times down the with their front three down the edges. And there was one amazing tackle by, was it Botman or was it Shaw? I can't remember on Buendia, which basically saved a goal, and that was kind of one of the turning points of the game. So it did look like Villa were up for it and on it and slippery and fast, and Newcastle were getting stretched a little bit, which was quite nice to see the way they just dug in there. And then obviously with the time wasting and not the time wasting, the serious head injury it turned out, which delayed the game by 10 minutes and 10 minutes of injury time. And they got the penalty. As soon as they got that penalty, it did look like Villa's heads went, and Newcastle regrouped a bit at half time and just slaughtered them second half. That first 15, 20 minutes of the second half was brilliant. I mean, everyone rocking. Villa had no time to think on the ball, and Newcastle got in there and scored 3. So.
Yeah, there's a brilliant stat that I've seen, and that's Newcastle haven't actually conceded in the first half since Wolves. They're really, really hard now to sort of get ahead of. Newcastle are often the team that are taking the lead, and you touched on it there. That back four that's just become so solid. Big tackle from Burn to deny Buendia. I think there was another one from Trippier soon after. Nick Pope hasn't really had a lot to do, has he, in the last couple of games at home? And this back four, on this podcast we discussed a couple of weeks ago, does Targett come back in? But this looks like it's the most settled it's ever been in a long time, doesn't it?
It does. I mean, I think the only debate for fans really at the minute is whether, like you say, Targett comes in for Dan Burn. And at times, like this Saturday as well, and I think against Spurs, sometimes Dan Burn gets a bit stretched when he gets turned, pace-wise. But the beauty of the Newcastle side is, he gets protected as Willock or Joelinton's in there, and people are covering across. But I think where it really works is that you've got Trippier, who is really attacking minded and can add to the midfield and become a winger almost. And when he's doing his stuff up the right and pushing on, it becomes a back three. And then Dan Burn effectively becomes like a left-sided centre back, which is probably which is obviously his best position. And he played for Brighton in a back three, is left side of a three defensive unit as well. So it kind of works in that way. I think obviously if you brought Targett in, or another left back, which might be one of the targets in the next couple of windows, you might get, if you get another Trippier on the left, it would be devastating and be unbelievable. But I think the balance that you've got with, as long as Trippier can get forward and they go to a back three, that kind of works and stays solid. But also Dan Burn, if you watch him closely, just spend 10 minutes just watching him. Even when the ball's not near him, he's being really aggressive with the people he's marking. He's bumping them and he's niggling them, and he walks a really fine line with the refs. But if you're getting marked by Dan Burn, you're getting a kick up the backside every 2 minutes, and it must be really awful to play against him. So I think he adds that kind of pressure and aggression in defence, which is really important, whereas Matt Targett probably doesn't.
Yeah, I think, the game against Manchester United, Anthony was really, really testing Dan Burn, and those are the games where he gets caught out when he's got sort of a tricky winger to face. And I think that's probably the positive Target, is that he probably deals with those types of players better. But they're certainly looking settled at the minute, and I think, going into the World Cup, it's hard to see that changing. I think most fans would agree. Wilson obviously scores the penalty then, very well taken, before getting his second goal. The thing that really, really baffles me about Callum Wilson is we all know how good he is, but he had 2 really bad ACL injuries at Bournemouth, which usually one of those would hamper a career. every couple of months, he picks up these hamstring problems, but they just never keep him down. And how he comes back all these times and keeps scoring it is just remarkable. And I think Eddie Howe's got a real headache on his hands when Alexander Isak comes back with what he does in terms of changing the setup, or does he, move Isak on the right? He's got to be knocking on that door now for an England spot next month, doesn't he?
Yeah, I mean, Callum Wilson is his strike record for Newcastle is remarkable. I think it's 6 goals in 9 starts this year, and he's probably up in there. I mean, Harry Kane's going to go to the World Cup. Dominic Calvert-Lewin's been in and around it more than Callum Wilson has, and he's been through the under-21s under Southgate as well. So there's kind of things going against him there, but he's fit and he's scoring goals, and he's a massive handful and can lead the line. Probably more so than Calvert-Lewin at the minute, and I think it's a really interesting shootout between the two of them in the next couple of weeks to see who can get goals. If Callum Wilson gets another couple of goals, as Gareth Southgate, if you're sitting there as Gareth Southgate, you can't ignore his claim to go there as a replacement lead centre forward for Harry Kane. I mean, he's only got 4 caps, I think, Wilson. He scored 1 goal. But he definitely deserves it, and he's doing a brilliant job of. He said the other day, he's not going to talk himself into the England squad. Only goals will do, but he's doing a great job of selling himself. He's speaking after most games when he's in London and on Saturday as well after the game, and he comes across. I mean, we don't know him well because we've not sat down with him for lengthy periods, but he seems like a really dedicated character. Even if he gets an injury, he'll not cut corners. He'll come back stronger. That's what he'll set his goals for. And he's one of those athletes who you kind of speak to him, and he's got a tunnel vision to get the best out of himself and not to let a team down and to really deliver. And you meet some footballers who, you're not sure about their mentality, but he seems to have a grade A, 100%. Pro mentality to be at the top and stay at the top, which is quite interesting to see. And he's obviously a very strong character as well to have around him, and also a very smiley, happy character as well. Every time we speak to him, he comes across as he has a joke and he laughs at other people's jokes, and he's you can imagine lifting a place. You feel better when you've spoken to him or when he's around you. So he's one of those characters that would be good to have in a squad, even if he's not playing, I think, because he'd be living his dream. He's told Eddie Howe it's his childhood dream to go to a World Cup. And fingers crossed, I really hope he does. I mean, selfishly, Newcastle will be hoping he has a week on a beach, has a rest, and comes strengthens and comes back strong in December. But you'd like our own players, Newcastle's own players, to be doing well for England.
Well, this was my next question, really, because we've spoken to Eddie Howe, we've asked him about Wilson and if he wants him to go. Do you think there's just a little bit of Eddie Howe that's thinking he doesn't get the call up just so we can back him in Cottonwall for a few weeks?
Yeah, I mean, it's good for the club. I think Eddie Howe would see the positives in if Newcastle have got a striker at the World Cup, if other people who he's looking at in January or in the summer see there's Bruno there and there's Pope there, and the more players Newcastle have at the World Cup, the more other countries are going to see, or other big players are going to see Newcastle on the map. So it'll be good in terms of the future of the club. And I think probably the owners want him there and that kind of thing. But if he's not picked, I mean, he'll be devastated and disappointed. But you can imagine him resetting his targets and thinking, right, I'm going to get 15 goals before the end of the season and prove what they missed and do it for Newcastle.
Yeah, I think I would have to agree with you. I wouldn't mind seeing him on the beach, but it is, like you say, a big dream of his. And there's a brilliant article that he did in 2017 when he was in rehab in Doha in Qatar, and he sort of said, in 5 years' time, I'm going to be back here with England. So on that side of it, you really do hope that he does get there. Yeah. So I guess he got the brace on Saturday. Newcastle wasted no time getting their 3rd goal, which essentially killed the game, really. Joelinton scoring after Wilson's shot. Another player who was obviously trying to impress a manager in the stands with Tite there. It feels with Joelinton that, yes, his transformation's been fantastic. He's had an amazing 12 months already, Howe. But that quality of the Brazil team that he's trying to get in is something, of a different level. And there's a feeling that maybe he might have left it too late, do you think, to get in that World Cup squad?
Well, we spoke to him after the game, and that was exactly words. Obviously Bruno went out with Tite, the Brazilian manager, for a steak on Friday. And there was pictures of that happening, and we all saw that picture and thought, oh, Joelinton didn't get the invite. Surely you could have. Surely, even if you're not going to pick him, you could have taken him out for a steak. But yeah, that was a bit unfortunate, and that kind of indicates that he's on the fringe and he's not had a call up yet. And with 19 days to go, you do wonder whether his chance is gone. But there's, injuries can happen, and I think like physicality wise, if that's the kind of game Brazil are going to play, Joelinton is up there with the best. He's charging around in a team that's fourth in the Premier League, battering people and never stops running. And he's been a brilliant combative midfielder for Newcastle, and up the left side, and he can play a bit further forward as well. Adds to the team off the ball massively. So it depends. I mean, I'm not an expert on Brazil's midfield, and I can imagine it being very technical. And maybe Joelinton hasn't got the kind of silky passing technical stuff that some of his rivals have got. And there was one, you could tell he was maybe a bit nervous in the opening minutes of the game on Saturday, where he got the ball out wide, kind of in Newcastle's half, and he played an awful pass straight to a Villa player, and a few of us had our head in his hands going, no, that's his World Cup gone. But he did improve, and he got more into the game and got his goal, which was good. So it would be nice to see Joelinton there. I think it's probably a long shot for him, but at least he's been watched and scored in front of the Brazil manager, and for the future, maybe he can get in there. But I mean, people say at the club he's got a really high pain threshold, and he's always got like niggling injuries, and they think he might be out for a game. But somehow they just put a bit of strapping on him, and what might be a painful injury for some players, Joelinton just plays through like an absolute beast. He's amazing. So maybe a week or two to rest would be good for him, and get him back in December the 26th or the cup game, hopefully.
Yeah, he's one of those players, and he's just a bit of a battering ram in the middle of the field, and he's thrown himself in at tackles that he probably shouldn't be, and he has always seemed to be picking up little knocks. He's picked up, his fifth yellow card. It means he misses the Southampton game at the weekend. It poses, another question for Eddie Howe as to what he does with that midfield. Sean Longstaff, Howe was asked after the game if he thought that was his best performance under Howe. A few fans, on social media probably didn't agree, and he gets a lot of stick, Longstaff, but he had a good game on Saturday, didn't he?
He did. I mean, there was one time where, the one thing that someone walked past the press box, actually, a fan, and said, I hope you're giving Longstaff a 4 after a 4-0 win. And he's just run about 12K and run his legs off, closing people down, and had a great game. So I don't know how you can keep lots of fans happy even after a 4-0 win. So I'm hoping that was a minority opinion, because Longstaff was literally everywhere the other day. If you look at his heat maps and where he had his ball touches, and it was literally the entire pitch that he was covering. And he's really come on under Eddie Howe. I think on the ball you might want him to be a bit better and a bit more creative, but you're not going to get the complete player. Like Bruno, you can't knock off the ball, can you? He's unbelievable. Longstaff is definitely worth his place in that anchoring 3 at the minute. Joelinton's been playing a bit higher up, hasn't he? So if Joelinton's coming out the team and maybe out the front 3, you would maybe look at Sam Max coming back, or maybe Jacob Murphy filling that role, Willock coming back in with Longstaff and Bruno to be the anchoring 3 in midfield, and that's probably what you would expect to happen. Might be too early for Shelvey to start a game. It'd be nursing him back still. Yeah. So I would probably say for an away game with his kind of solid attitude, Jacob Murphy might step in for Joelinton at Southampton initially, and then you've got Shelvey can come on, Willett can push up, or you've got Sam Max to come on if that doesn't quite work out.
Yeah, so
I think there's a few nice options.
Yeah, there is, and it's a nice headache for Howe to have. And listeners of this podcast will know that me and Andrew sometimes disagree about Longstaff, and I'm very defensive of him because of what he does off the ball. I think there's no better midfielder that presses like he does, and I think it's good to see that he's actually starting to get some plaudits after Saturday, because I think he has been brilliant. And I think I would agree with you, that is probably the 3 I'd go with at Southampton. I think Murphy, showed enough in the last couple of games. I thought he looked quite lively on Saturday. I think especially as they want to try and, as you say, nurse Shelvey and St Max back slowly before the World Cup. It's 20 minutes in and we haven't spoke about the man of the moment, and that is Miggy Almiron. He obviously added the 4th and final goal. He's having a goal of the month competition just among himself, really. We've been in the office today picking out 4 or 5 of his strikes that are probably worthy of it. You've got to probably go back a long way to see, beyond Joelinton, quite a transformation like it at Newcastle, given what we've seen in the last 6 games.
Yeah, when he always looked a bit like a headless chicken when he first signed it. He was quick enough. He was definitely quick enough. He was a big enough pest to defenders to be in that position, but you never got the end product. So he reminded me a bit like a smaller, quicker Gutierrez in that he could get the ball and he could hair upfield with it and be like a pressure reliever to the team. But you never saw the polish at the end of the pitch, which you probably needed. And a lot of people thought, well, Newcastle only signed him for 20 million. Maybe you don't get that with a 20 million pound player from the MLS. But I think every player has his moment, especially when, and I think, you were also been judging him in a team which was a defensive minded, had 30% worth of possession, and were banked up, behind the ball against teams for 2-3 seasons. So you're judging an attacker in that kind of team, and now we're judging him in an Eddie Howe team where it's front foot. They're 30, 40 yards further up the pitch. They're pressing defenders in their own box in 3s and 4s. And so that's a whole new mindset. And he's probably, I don't know, you would need to find the stats guys at Newcastle will have it all, but where he gets the ball and positions he receives it in, they're probably he's probably getting it in 10 times more dangerous positions and 10 times more in a game than he was, a year ago. And therefore the chances are easier, although he has scored some spectacular ones, hasn't he? Mm-hmm. And that one against Villa, we were right behind him and he just got that little bit of space on his left foot and just passed it into the top corner. It was like effortless. Now, the one thing that amazes me with like opposition sides coming up against Almiron, you just show him down the line. When he's running up the right wing, you show him down the line. He hasn't got a right foot. He can never whip it in with his right foot. So I don't know how these teams aren't spotting it, but he should be easier to marshal than he is. But then he comes inside and he's giving people problems. And I don't know, maybe he's too quick and they can't stop him. Maybe he's just got superpowers that we don't know of.
Well, it's another disagreement me and Andrew have had over the last couple of months because he's been, he will tell you, and he tells everybody on this podcast a lot, that he's always believed in Miggy and he's always been in the fan club, even when others were doubting him. And that was one of my big gripes, was that he's playing as a right winger and he can't use his right foot. But I think what he's done in the last couple of weeks has sort of silenced quite a few people, including myself. You touched on it there. He just used to sort of pick up the ball and run into blind channels and, with no real purpose. Now he's just full of confidence. He's picking the right passes, the right moves. And I think Bruno and Trippier have really helped him, down that right. They work very well as a three. Which of the 4 goals then, which of the 6 goals, I should say, do you think would win that goal of the month competition? It's got to be Fulham for me, I think, that volley.
The one where it was chipped over the top and he was at a funny angle and he should have really taken it on his right foot.
Yeah, Fulham.
But he took it on his left foot. And I'd like to know what kind of contact he really got on that. Cause it maybe looked like he rolled down his shin a bit, but maybe, I don't know, we'll never know. He'll claim it was a clean strike, but that, from the angles that were involved and the left foot twistiness of the shot he had to get in and to keep it under the bar, and I thought that was a really big skill to pull that off. It was really good. The other one, I think he would score more. The one this weekend against Villa, where he cut inside and passed it to the top corner. You'd like to see him doing like that 5 times a year because it's right up his street if he gets a yard of freedom to do that. But the other one was a freaky goal. It was a real great skill. So probably that one, yeah.
Yeah, I think I would agree with you. I think that one or the Everton one where he just lifts it over Pickford, I think those 2 are the best of the bunch for me. One more question on Miggy, and that is, we've spoke to Eddie Howe about it, and a lot has been made of the Grealish comments. Howe insists that, there's no ammunition there. He doesn't think about it. Do you agree with that, or do you think, that's part of his motivation this season?
If training grounds as they are and dressing rooms, they'll have seen that, and they might have had a laugh and thought there may be an element of truth in this, but they'll have also thought, and I hope Miggy has also thought, that's really a little bit insulting from a player who's had a couple of beers and is on a stage and saying he's had an Almiron. It's from professional to professional. It's not a nice thing to do, and it's quite rare. That's why we talk about it so much. It's quite rare that actually happens in football, that someone actually makes a sarcastic comment about a fellow pro. But it did have a little grain of truth in, and the things that hurt you most, the insults that hurt you most, are the ones that have got a grain of truth in. And I would think that he looked great in Austria when we went to pre-season training, and he looked sharp and fit and determined. I think that's probably been on his mind. There's also a clip from, I think it's the summer friendlies in June when Paraguay players were like chasing Grealish and trying to give him a kick in a certain game. There's a good clip on YouTube as well. So it's definitely got around football, and it's definitely in Miggy's head now. What we need to do is ask him about it. But his English, he walks by us with his baby and his wife in every mixed zone at St James's Park, smiling and waving, and he won't stop and speak. And the first thing we want to ask him is, what's your message to Jack Grealish now? Yeah. And he's not answered that question yet. And one day he'll have to, hopefully.
I think he pretends, doesn't he, that he doesn't know English, but he's been here 3 years. And I think if Bruno can learn it in 8 months, I think he certainly can. Yeah. Just before we go, we've got some comments here. A lot of people asking about January, and I think that's the question now is, what do they do in January? Do they go for 1 or 2 more of real quality to try and aid this European push, or do you think that Eddie Howe is going to want to keep this group pretty much as settled as it is now?
Well, the first thing to say is they've got the powder dry in terms of Isak's hardly played for them so far. So they've got a £60 million man to when he's healed to do the pre-season before the December relaunch. So they've got him to come back, he'll be fresh and hopefully hungry. And anyhow, you trust him to get a way of working him into the team, which is going to be really good. So we've got him to come back, and then there's Sam Max, who's been out for so long, who get him a couple of games now before the break, and then really push him physically so that he's on it. So there's 2 players already coming back to add to that side, which might well get injuries. So that's good news. And Shelby too, who can sit in for Bruno or add to Bruno. So there's 3 players who hardly figured, who are really top-notch players to come back. But you've got an opportunity this season which you might not have. Liverpool are having a stinker at the moment. Man U are rebuilding. Chelsea are wobbly and in transition. West Ham, who got 7th last year, have dipped. So there's seasons that come around. The World Cup's going to disrupt, and I think Newcastle will be disrupted less by the World Cup than a lot of the other. They're kind of top 4 rivals now. So I do think there's an opportunity there, and if there's players to get, then they can do it. Then I don't think anyone's going to be loaning them any top quality players, put it that way, because they're now too much of a threat. If they can put decent money and get 1 or 2 in January, that'll be great. We did ask Eales about this, the chief executive, Darren Eales, when he did his first introductory chat about 3 weeks ago. And he was saying, and also Dan Ashworth, and they were saying we all know it's a bad time to sign. Yeah. Prices are a bit inflated. And it depends if teams that they want to sign from are dropping out of the Champions League or have money problems. So, there's that. They might want another power midfielder. They might want, if one became available, a top-notch left back. They might want another winger. But if you've got Isaac coming back playing off Wilson, you need 3 or 4 players on your bench who are really, really annoyed not to be playing in the first team and who are top notch and worth a lot of money. Newcastle have got that at the minute. I think they'll want to add, but they say they haven't got a lot of money. Do we believe that? I mean, we kind of believed it at the end of last year, and then they spent another 100 million. They say 200 million in a year is an unsustainable spend. Well, it probably is, but at some point, extra, money's going to kick in from sponsorship deals next summer. So if you can get a player now, you do it now, and next summer the Saudis pump in a sponsorship deal for fair value, and that fair value now is going to be sky high compared with what sponsorships are paid for now at Newcastle. Because if they can get in the top 6, they can point to Man City or Liverpool and say they're sponsored to the tune of 200 million, 100 million by Emirates, whatever the figures are. Mm-hmm. And Newcastle sponsorship deal could go up tenfold if the Saudis wanted to. And that's how they're going to get money into this club. So other clubs have done it. Newcastle are probably going to do it. Fair enough. So that's what we're looking at in the summer. They might have a lot more money to spend in the summer. I think they'll definitely be looking to freshen it up in January. And even though they say they haven't got the money, somehow it will be found, and deals will be structured long term. And the longer the contract and the younger the player and all that kind of stuff really helps for the financial fair play. Also, they're going to have to sell a little bit as well. I think there might be 2 or 3 get off the wage bill, get out for a few million just to help things along.
Yeah, I think they're certainly in a good position if they can go into this World Cup break in the top 4 and say to the owners, look, if we can just get 1 or 2 more over the line. You know, they've got a real chance now. Now, for those not watching live, Simon has just said, he's done sort of air quotes there when he said top 4 rivals, and this leads to the last question that I've got for you, and that is, Pep Guardiola obviously touched on it last week. He said Newcastle United are contenders for the top 4. Eddie Howe, of course, we know him. He's never going to, you know, put any pressure on like that. Realistically now, given the start, where do you think the club, one, will finish, and where do you think, you know, their targets will be now?
I think they're very capable of finishing in the top 7, like minimum. I think they'll be disappointed actually after this start if they finish below 7th, right? So that's like that would have been brilliant otherwise, right? But with this start that they've done, I think 7th would be lower than 7th would be disappointment. I think 7th would be, I'd say, par for the course from the start they've had. Fair enough, 7th, and I think a few would be disappointed with that, but I don't think they should be. 7th would be an amazing leap. I think they can finish in the top 6. I think they can just upset one of the established elite, despite their turnovers being 3 times of Newcastle and their wage bills being 3 times Newcastle. The relentlessness to finish in the top 4, that you need to keep winning and put 6, 7, 8 wins in a row together to finish in the top 4. I think that's really tough to do. But I mean, the way they're playing now, they're winning games and they're on they don't even look. They clearly are busting a gut, but the system is so good, it almost looks routine, and there doesn't look to be any fluke about the way the team is set up, and they all know their jobs, and they're physically on it, and they're scoring goals, and they're not conceding. They're really tough to play against. There's no reason why that can't continue through December, January, when others have distractions of Champions League and cup games and all that. No reason why it can't continue. So it's possible that they can get top 4. And now we're kind of used to, because of the money in the game and the way the Premier League's been teased out, and it's the same top 6, and there's a bit of a fight between the different positions. We're not used to the Premier League surprising us. But there was an interesting comment from, it was either Eales or Ashworth when we spoke to them in the boardroom, saying, well, there's always the Leicester City season. You know, Leicester City, no one expected that to happen in a similarly disrupted season when other teams are rebuilding. You never know what's going to happen. Now, Leicester won the league. So if Leicester can win the league at 5,000-1, Newcastle can get in the Champions League at much reduced odds to that. So it is possible that Newcastle can finish in the top 4. You'll not get anyone talking about it at Newcastle because they don't want to set themselves up for a fall. They don't want to set expectations too high. This is meant to be a sustainable, steady building project last year when they took over. And sustainable and steady was not going from relegation, bottom 3 this time last year, to top 4. That's ludicrous. And what's happening is ludicrous. But it's not ludicrous when you see them play and you see the system and the commitment and the dedication and the planning and the detail that's going into it, and the completely united hunting as a pack thing that Newcastle have got at the minute. It's not ludicrous to think that they could finish in the top 4, and it's quite exciting this season because of that, and it's a joy to cover.
It is, and it makes a change. I think, you know, you're pretty much spot on there. I think now, you know, the targets will have changed slightly from the start of the season, and I think, you know, it would sort of be a disappointment now for a drop out. No European games, you know, to sort of hold them back as other teams will. But as you say, it's just a pleasure to finally be covering a club that are in this position. Thanks very much, Simon, for coming on. Thank you, everyone who has watched us live and also listening later. Please do continue to check out the podcast. We'll have plenty more this week, including Gibbo's preview against Southampton. For now, thank you very much, and we'll speak to you again very soon.